How's it going, everybody? We're the Molloy twins, and today we have a special announcement.
So on Saturday, the 30th of March, the Molloy twins are hosting our first ever live event. We're going to be inviting back some previous guests we've had on the show to chat about some things that we didn't get to chat about on the episodes. Plus, me and Lee will be sharing some of our own lessons, learnings and laughs along the way over the last few months to hopefully have you walking out there feeling inspired and motivated to work harder and dream bigger than ever before.
Tickets are now available through the link in our bio. Capacity is extremely limited because we want to keep this as valuable and as intimate as possible. So make sure to get your ticket as soon as you can. Thank you to everyone for all of the support so far, and we can't wait to see you there. Welcome back to the Molloy Twins podcast. This is season 2, episode 7, and today we're joined with Senator Lynn Ruane. Lynn, thanks for coming in today.
You're very welcome.
No, we do appreciate it. How are you getting on this week? How's things?
Grand. Did we have a bank holiday this week or was that last week? That was last week,
That was
it?
last week,
Was
yeah.
it last week?
Yeah,
Yeah.
first week, yeah.
No, well,
The weeks
yeah.
just joined together, don't
Okay.
they?
Yeah, no, this week has been grand. It's I'm in the chamber most days, but it's Fridays I kind of work from Tallaght and stuff, so
Happy
it
days.
kind of feels like my Friday on a Thursday.
Yeah. No, I like that. Before we get into the nitty gritty of the episode,
Yeah.
obviously you're a senator. There's a lot of people who listen to this podcast either don't care about politics, don't feel attached to politics in any way, and the whole concept of like Dáil, Seanad, Senator, TD just goes over the head. I'm going to try to explain what a senator is,
Yep.
and then you tell me from your personal experience how wrong I am, or hopefully right. But
Well, you did do a little bit of time in my office. I'm going to out you, so if you can't explain what the Senate does, we're in trouble.
I'm one of those who's in that book of I haven't got a clue what the difference is, so I'll let you know after this explanation if you succeeded.
I'm going to keep this as like to a 5-year-old as possible because that's my level of understanding of these things. But basically, the Irish Parliament's made up of two houses. You have the Dáil, which is the lower house, and the Seanad, which is the upper house. The Dáil is elected by the general public through general elections. The Seanad are elected through different ways. I know you're in through Trinity College, so some colleges can elect senators. The Tallaght can elect senators, and then like different interest groups or like vocational groups can elect senators. And then the role of the Seanad is basically to provide accountability for different pieces of legislation that come through the government, and then to make proposals for new different pieces of legislation as well. Sound okay?
Yeah. So the only thing then on the interest groups piece is, so they don't elect the senators, they nominate the senators to be able to run on the panels.
Okay.
But the county councillors still elect them, but the body of interest groups get to say whether they support that candidate running on that panel.
I get you.
Yeah.
Nice. And this might be a stupid question. Before you ran for the Seanad, were you familiar with what the Seanad done?
No.
I'm glad you said that because I hadn't got a clue either.
Yeah, no, I don't. I like most people watch the Dáil because that's what gets the most attention.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate in many ways because the quality of the debate in the Seanad is often a lot more informative because it's less adversarial.
Yeah.
Because we're not constituency mates, we're not trying to get one up on each other.
Yeah.
Where we very much scrutinise legislation line by line by line. So, you actually kind of sometimes get into the nitty gritty and meat of
So you
legislation.
can actually learn something from those ones,
Yeah. Well, from some of us, anyway. Not all of us.
Did you just mute the microphones?
This might be a stupid question, but why do you need an upper and a lower house? Why is like the Dáil not enough of itself?
It's checks and balances, right? So in it, like some people go, get rid of the Seanad, what's it for? It's no use. What do they do? We only need to waste the money, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But the thing is, what we need is a reformed Seanad, first of all. You need to have much more people be able to vote for a Seanad election. It's quite, like the way you've explained it, it's quite a niche kind of electorate. You know what I mean? Like Trinity graduates get to vote 3 senators in. Why would that not be like all graduates in the country and further eds, or why does not everybody just have a vote in the Seanad? And that would have been historically so that I had very particular expertise in the Seanad. But why you need 2 is, and why it's important is because it means then you don't get a government so say you had a government and they had a full majority and they can just then drive through anything, and you don't have a second house that then has to put halts on things. If you have some, imagine if we look at the likes of Hungary and other countries, you have extremely right-wing governments appearing in particular countries that are becoming really problematic for inclusivity and for equality and for women's rights and stuff. And a Seanad, a Senate, as it would be known in other countries, when it's effective, should be able to kind of put the brakes on something, and make sure that legislation is grounded, I suppose, in human rights, making sure that it has an equality lens, making sure it has an independent oversight, basically, and the Seanad should act as independent oversight. The problem is that too many government people are in the Seanad when it should be more independent. So there's too many politicians in the Senate that want to get into the Dáil, so they focus on constituencies. They're not supposed to focus on constituencies. I don't have a constituency clinic.
Okay,
I don't represent Tallaght. I don't represent Trinity. People will think, but Trinity vote you in, and say they're my electorate. But I'm national. I'm a national parliamentarian. Right. So the Senate is supposed to have an independence where it has a national independent oversight of legislation to make sure, I suppose, that the legislation that you're creating is decent.
That makes a lot of sense. You're like almost supposedly like impartial, objective. Like you're able to look at those things and say, you maybe consider this, or maybe that's not in the best interest of these people who aren't taking into consideration. Okay. I'm glad that's in place. That sounds logical.
Well, having it in place is one thing. Having it work effectively, I think, is a different thing. Does it? I mean, I probably already know the answer, but working in politics, does it make it hard to stay optimistic?
Yes. It does. But I think it also reminds you of the injustices, and I suppose if you're driven by trying to act as a counter opposition to an unfair or unjust or an unequal society, you're reminded every day the necessity of it. But it's hard to stay optimistic because it doesn't feel like you're doing enough, or enough is changing, and you get to see just all the hardships. You get to see, whatever about me being a politician, I also, I'm quite a deep thinker. I constantly read philosophy. My degree is I majored in philosophy, so I think a lot, and I think about life, and I think about values and principles and ethics and all these things, and morality, and so for me, the idea that we all have one shot at a life, and how moral luck gets to decide where you're born, what country you're born into, whether you're born into a war-torn country, whether you're born into a family that has intergenerational trauma and poverty. That's all luck. And that whether privilege or poverty gets to determine how your life will unfold is luck. Yet we have to carry that on from that like luck of birth, and for me, being in politics, it's hard to remain optimistic that you can create a society where everyone gets to flourish. And I suppose people think that, we live in a republic of opportunity, and it's a equality of opportunity, and it's like, well, it's not actually. We don't have equality of opportunity. So people just think, well, but you can go to college if you want, and that's somehow equality of opportunity. And it's like, well, can I just go to college if I want? If I come from a system where I don't have anyone to talk to about academics, or if nobody I know has ever gone to college, if I went to a school that's really underserved and under-resourced, that's not equality of opportunity, because you have to be able to take the opportunity when it arises. But if you have all these other deficits, societal, environmental, or cultural deficits, well, then it's very hard to engage in that opportunity. Like, I always think of I remember sitting, I don't know where it was, some European city, and I remember I had to write an article for Task, which is the think tank, and on equality of opportunity. And I was watching, do you ever see those people that might do the bubbles for the kids, and you might throw them some money on the street, and they have all the kids are chasing the bubbles. And so them big giant bubbles are just being released into the air, and the kid can see the bubble, but by the time it gets to the bubble and touches it, it just explodes. And I just kept picturing that being like opportunity, so it's like, I get so many people coming to me, I worked really hard, I got the highest in my class, my ma got me grinds even though she couldn't afford them, she got me help with maths, but then I still didn't get into college. So then what do? Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of like, it doesn't matter if you can see the bubble. If it bursts every time you touch it, it's not equality of opportunity, So for me, like, the conversation needs to be, for me to get more optimistic about being a politician, it's also about equality of one's environment. And we need equality of environment. Now, it's what you do if you have a flourishing environment, and then you're making your decisions from there, and that's what looks equal, whether you're a traveller on a Halton site, or whether you go to one of the Alexandra colleges. It's like, it shouldn't matter if you have equality of environment, well then you should be able to engage in opportunity, do you know? But so it is hard to stay optimistic, but
no, it's a great answer. And I think something that myself and anyone who knows of you has always admired about you is a lot of politicians look at society in almost like a bird's eye view. It's like, these are the problems that affect everyone else. They don't really affect me, but I pretend to care enough to do something about it. Your approach has always been much more grounded and community led, and just, this isn't some abstract problem that may exist in the world. This is something that people around me or people I care about suffer with on a daily basis. And I think it comes through, and like, for example, my mother, she couldn't tell you a single thing that you supported in the Shannon, a single motion you've put forward, a single comment you made on anything, but she'd see you in an interview and know that what you're saying comes from a place of truth, and that what you're talking about is something that actually means something to you. So I think just having you as, like, I don't want to call you like the spearhead of whatever, but having people like you in the Shannon or in those kind of public places brings a lot of hope and inspiration to people that, although it may be difficult to be optimistic about the future of Ireland in certain moments, the more people like Lynn Ruane we have in those kind of positions, I think the easier it will become to become optimistic about it.
I think so, and I think that's why we need, like, you know, we have gender quotas for a reason, and I agree with gender quotas because it's like an access program in a college, right? People think, oh, but are they getting through the back door? Like, should they be there? And it's like, no. You still have to do something with it when you're there, like, do you know what I mean? But it's because, like, say, trying to be a male and get, if you're trying to be if you're a woman and trying to get into politics, it's really difficult in terms of cash, in terms of getting on the ticket. All the men for donkey's years, oh, you can see me language hasn't changed, for donkey's years, you know, they drink together, they all are making deals about who gets on the ticket. Women go home, they look after the children, they, you know, their confidence, everything. So it's really hard as a woman to get into politics. But nobody talks about what it must be like for a working class woman to get into politics. So people talk about gender, but they don't necessarily talk about class and intersectionality. So they're not talking about how hard it is for black and brown women to get into politics, for traveller women to get into politics. They're only talking about how hard it is for women.
In general,
But that could be just a load of, like, status quo women. That doesn't change anything. Do you know what I mean? So, like, whatever about my voice being in there, unless we manage to get the larger parties to recognise intersectionality, and it's not just about women on the ticket or men on the ticket, but it's about what type of women and men on the ticket and how intersectional are they and how diverse are they, so that you can have that full range of voices in politics. Yeah,
no, it's a great point. And it's funny the way you say that, because in many ways you were like, if I had to, like, craft the perfect person who shouldn't be a politician, it would be Lynn Ruane, based off what a politician traditionally was. It's like female from a working class area who didn't do a leaving cert, single mother from a young age, like all these things that just in 50 or 100 years earlier you'd be completely wrote off by society. To see where you're at today, it's I don't want to say Ireland has, like, made a whole lot of leaps forward, because it has a lot of work to do, but it is impressive to see how far it's come in that regard.
No, I think it needs to not be a story anymore, and I think that's the point, that it can't just, like, if someone said, oh, is there any working class women in Irish politics, and someone just goes, Lynn Ruane. Like,
we made it, we did it.
Do you know what I mean? So it should be like that. I'm not identifiable. It should be so normal.
Anyone can be a politician. I agree.
The stage of evolution. I was curious, like, those things that you mentioned there around recognising intersectionality and, like, diversity and bringing those things, like, do you feel a resistance in some of the parties towards, like, recognising those things? And, like, I know it's hard to say, but, like, what drives the resistance? Like, why do they not want those things? Or
I think people are slow to recognise that class exists. So,
really,
if you recognise that class exists in a big way, I think that people that are struggling, whether it be working class people, whether it be people that just come from different minority groupings in general, what we usually all share is a lack of access, regardless of our ethnicity, race, gender. Like, we share a lack of access and a lack of power and a lack of wealth. And for the state to recognise that we have a class system, it also has to recognise how it upholds that class system, and it holds on to its own power. So I think people tend to kind of fob off class as a thing, and I think if you were to dig down into that deeper and further, it's also because they think there's something special about them and not about us. So we experience poverty or addiction or high levels of criminality or low levels of education because we are working class, not because that they have actually created the environment where the divide or the gap between those who have and those who don't have. So they think that, like, I'm saying they think, but I'm like, obviously I'm speaking, you know, somewhat abstractly when I'm saying they. Like, I think they blame us. That if we just got up and worked a little bit harder, and if we cared a little bit more, and if our mothers cared more about education, and if our fathers worked a little bit harder, or if, you know, that somehow they blame us for experiencing poverty. And when I say us, I mean obviously communities and communities like ours, and, you know, whether that's you know, similar geographic demographics. So I think in some level they don't accept that they've created a system, a societal system, whereby people struggle. You know, we only have to look at how the housing situation. We only have to look at, you know, going on and furthering your education, going on to university. Like, you know, kids in Tallaght are no less smarter than kids in, you know, like a D4 or a D6. But I think they are smarter.
Yes,
Rather than it being actually about having access to being able to actually learn in a positive environment, you know. So I don't think they recognise class. Well, I sit in the chamber sometimes and I hear the classes things being said, and nobody bats an eyelid. Now, if you were to say something really gendered or really racist, people say, don't do that. But I can see they haven't yet. Like, I mean, one of the senators a few weeks ago on the debate on the referendums that are coming up basically said that the decline of marriage is what has resulted in an increase in criminality. And I was like, what? What? Right? And no, but I'm looking because I'm fuming. And I'm like, nobody has even noticed what this person has said.
It just goes over the head,
right? And that's because I'm going, they don't understand class, right? So obviously I have to come back in and say, actually, the increase in criminality is from a lack of resource, a lack of being able to meet one's economic needs. So just because a person, like if you were to do like a study or research piece of a community that has a high rate of criminality or criminal behaviour, and their parents happen either not to be married or they happen to be one parent households, they don't engage in criminality because they came from a one parent household. It's because the one parent households have not been supported from a resource housing health perspective. So the poverty is what creates the conditions of any sort of antisocial behaviour. But like somebody can stand in the chamber and say basically single mothers are raising criminals, and it's because they're not married. When you break it into my language, that's what you're saying, you know, and it's like they don't notice. So that shows me that like it's like I'm the only one that can hear it. You know, now you might point it out to some people and they go, oh yeah, that's not great. Like, but there's not a natural reaction to sometimes things that people say. Like,
that's crazy.
That's a great point. And like it transcends, like even in the way, in the legislation that's put forward, and the way laws are like put into place, and the way Garda enforce certain laws, and even the way things are reported on, you can see the kind of traces of classism within it all. Like if a group of young fellas in Blackrock or something are out doing drugs, like the lads on a night out, if it's a group of young fellas in Tallaght, it's scumbags. Like it's those little
but you could have a load of young fellas you know, in suits walk through a park in a more advantaged community, right? And they're not called a gang. You have a group of young fellas talk at a shop in a community elsewhere, and they're called a gang. And it's like, a group of people does not mean a gang. You're saying a gang because it has a negative connotation, right?
A criminal organisation.
But if you've a group of young lads who are in a different community, you know, are banging a ball against the wall with their hurls, and they play for some local, or they're playing rugby, or why aren't they a gang? Why are we gangs? Do you know? Because we walk to the shop in sixes.
Exactly.
Like,
split into threes.
We would go one by one.
Single file.
You go to shop and I'll go in 5 minutes, and then I'll go, and then we won't be framed as a gang. Do you know? So it's kind of like, even that term gang is put on particular type of people, what they look like, what they're wearing, right? And just because a group of people doesn't mean it's a gang, you know. So there's all that kind of sort of stuff. Do you know what I mean?
No, that's unreal. I remember when I was in college, I studied athletic therapy, so it's like physiotherapy. But there was one module we done that had like fucking nothing to do with physiotherapy, but I got loads out of it, and it was sociology. And there was some points that the lecturer made in that I'd never really thought of. At this stage I would have been like 17, first year of college, so it was my first time like hearing different backgrounds, whatever else. But she was talking about the idea of rugby, and how like traditionally in Ireland's posh schools, let's say, will play rugby and down the country, but in Dublin, like working class areas, probably wouldn't have rugby, and like we didn't have a rugby team in our school, so we couldn't even play rugby if we wanted to. And like those ideas of maybe me or Lee, for example, we're tiny, so we probably wouldn't have been, but could have been like unreal rugby players. Like maybe genetically or whatever, we had potential to be like the best rugby players ever, but because you grow up in a place where they don't play rugby, you never get to experience that. And then,
but like people always say, isn't it great? We've such a great rugby team. The rugby team is doing so great on an international stage.
Yeah.
Why is rugby doing so great? And why is soccer struggling, say, at a national level in terms of, say, just for example, the men's teams, just to do a comparison between the men's and the women's, the men's and the men's rugby team, the men's soccer team. Soccer teams are very poorly funded.
Yep.
They don't get resourced in the same way that rugby do. If you look at the sports capital grants in terms of rugby schools and the investment they get with pitches and all of that, so the investment that's gone into rugby has been at such a standard. Of course we're doing amazing. We've been able to nurture the sport and nurture the players, and that's not the same when it comes to soccer, because it's not invested in the same way. Like I've seen sports capital grants being refused for people that wanted to buy like lawnmowers for their pitch in a community, like, you know what I mean? And then there's low rakes of money go, and they all know how to fill out the sports capital grants forms well, because they're all in the same circles. Do you know what I mean? So like you invest in sports in every community, and you will see natural sports people, regardless of the sport. Do you know what I mean? It's not that people in them schools are just more prone to be great rugby players.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
same thing that you mentioned earlier of like they look at the issue as being like, oh, these people are just better than those people. It's like the other way around. It's the resources that they're brought into is what then leads to better outcomes.
Yeah, and I don't think, and it's never like it's sometimes when you're talking about class and stuff, it's like people think you're trying to attack another group of people, and it's not. It's kind of going, no, like equality benefits us all. You know, so it's not about we want to switch the table so that we get more and then you all suffer.
Yeah, you see how it feels for a while.
We just want everyone to have an equal share of life and opportunity and progress. And do you know what I mean? And obviously people will do what they will with that when they have it, you know what I mean? And some people will still struggle even if they have that, but on a larger scale it's really just about fairer systems and fairer chances, you know?
Yeah, it definitely runs deep. Even during my time in Trinity, I was involved with TAP, and we would go to like different schools and talk to them about the access programme and different like educational related issues that, you know, come under that kind of social class bracket and challenges that you may face. And not a lot of times, but a couple of times there'd be like maybe a teacher or like somebody else in the classroom who came from an area like, I don't know, Blackrock or one of those kind of areas, and they would always kind of politely challenge the idea that someone from those kind of areas has it easier than someone else. And I've always like, I could see where they were coming from, because obviously if you've never faced a challenge you don't know how much of a challenge it is, but I always struggle to find a way to have that conversation in that wasn't combative, and that like we both came out of it feeling like it wasn't me against you, it was just we recognised this problem. Have you, throughout your time in the Shannon and just having conversations with people, found a way to have that class discussion without it becoming me against you?
And you see, I try and keep it about systems and access and, you know, rather than it being an individual thing. But I think what I find the hardest when I speak about it is, say if it's about addiction specific stuff, you know, or even poverty itself, you will get people say, oh, well, I know somebody that and they're like, you know, somebody, just one person, is
singular.
it? You know, one person who happened to be stuck in addiction. Do you know? And they think because they've had this one relatable experience that it's somehow relatable to the experience, and it's not. So, like, I'd be like, no, but I can tell you who's not struggling with addiction. Do you know what I mean? Like, or who's not experiencing poverty. You're telling me this one person who is, and I'll point to the one person who's not. Our community is concentrated in it. Do you know what I mean? There's so much struggle. And I think that annoys me, because I'm like, they don't get it. Like, you know, they don't get it. And I think they think that the supports that get, like, you know, little cosmetic changes that get given to communities, like, or for you can have this fund for this, for this 1 year, and after 1 year you're going to give us a big report about how it changed everything. You're like, what, really? Like, I'm just going to give you some like outcome that we've like solved the youth justice problem in Ireland because you gave us 1 year funding, like
12 months, 60 grand.
You know what I mean?
Stop.
And measuring people like their financial figures or units, like you can't, like, you know, change takes time, you know,
generations.
Yeah, you know,
spreadsheet governance.
So it's not even that it always feels like us and them. It feels like God, you either are purposely not wanting to understand this, or you actually are completely dismissing it as a concept. Do you know what I mean? Like, people like to say, oh, no, it's not like the UK. The UK has a class system. That's one they use a lot.
Okay, right.
And it's like, we have a class system. Like, we have a class system. Like, you know, yeah.
Madness. I would have thought the people in there would have their shit figured out, man.
But why? It doesn't serve them to.
It's true. Yeah, I understand the optimism thing you were talking about.
Yeah. See, the thing is, even in the larger parties, you'll get like a couple of people that understand it, and you kind of really hope that they'll help drive something.
Yeah.
But they'll always fold into the collective then, really, because they're part of a machine in a sense. But you do have, of course, you still have people who do get it, like, and do understand it, but they're individuals within systems rather than systems getting it. You know, the whole kind of. The whole power structure getting it.
It just feels like one of those things that hopefully, like 100 years from now, they look back on and be like, what the fuck were we doing back then? Like, how did that, it's not that way. Like, we probably look back on things that existed hundreds of years ago and be like, oh, that was stupid. Like, what was going on with all them?
Yeah.
It's like, we'll probably be in the same boat now in the next generation.
That's the whole point. Progress is supposed to, but the only thing is with politics, progress, it takes so long for things to happen.
Yeah, but it also, they don't want, you have to have it nearly just have a complete revolution. Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, if you keep people down enough, you would think that they would, you know, revolt at some stage, right? But it's very, very hard, because systems have created a great way at making people who have little revolt against the other person who has little.
A little bit more.
Rather than against the people who actually have the control of wealth and power in a country. You know, so people turn on each other. And that serves the power structures as well, you know. And for me, it's like, you know, even though change takes a while, there's nobody really working on the complete eradication of the class system. Everyone's only looking to go, oh, well, if we do this thing over here, you know, or we build a few houses, it's all piecemeal stuff.
Plasters over holes.
It's all piecemeal. It's not, it's not a restructuring.
I get you. Another question I wanted to ask you was, obviously, politics as a whole, like, is just this abstract word that means like 100,000 different things to different people. But I feel like anyone who has any interest in politics, there was like one issue that like hooked them and got them into it, and then once they got in there, they were like, holy shit, there's a lot to this. Do you remember if there was one specific topic, one incident, one issue that brought you into the fold of like, actually, politics is something that I care about now?
Well, I suppose I developed addiction services for a long time, and I was quite embedded in like community development style of work. So for me, it was the years of austerity that politicised me. So I always had a sense of injustice. Like, usually it was if somebody was being unjust to me. You know, when you're younger, it's like, it's just me. It's all about me. You know. So, but then that, you know, as you get older, the injustices span out and it becomes more of a collective endeavour then. But it was the years of austerity when I seen how, you know, wealth was bailed out and struggling communities were just absolutely assaulted with constant austerity budgets, and it didn't matter how many people died because their youth services were reduced, their programmes were gone, addiction services were being dismantled, all of that type of stuff. It would have been that when I seen that, like, if something goes wrong in the country, we already get very little, and they'll make sure that you're the one that will pay with your very little, you know, while bankers are bailed out, and, you know, the wealthy remain wealthy, but the poor were always poor, but they get even poorer, you know, and their resources that they do have are taken away. No,
100%. I think that was the austerity years post-recession, like kind of 2008 to still up to today in some situations.
Yeah, it is. Well, a lot of places never, like, it was never restored. Like, we're still dealing with the housing, the collapse of the housing system because of all of those years and what went before austerity, what led us there in the first place, you know. And then, you know, drugs, services still are at a resource level pre-2008. They've never actually been reinstated their funding. Yeah. No. So, like, you've projects even now that are wondering how they're going to pay the increase in energy costs to be able to still run their programs. So there hasn't even been, like, every now and again they might throw out a little small budget, like, but it's not a consistent thing to match the increase in rents and commercial rates, you know, in just keeping your building open. You know, so people still very much feel like they're in 2008.
Yeah.
You know, yeah.
Yeah. Have you actually made any progress since then, or are we still just trying to catch back up to where we were before all that happened?
Well, again, it's decisions. A lot of sectors have remained to do okay. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Again, it's those who have, that will find it hardest to be at the table, to set the agenda, to make sure that,
voice their side of the bargain. Yeah.
One topic you mentioned there, in relation to drugs, and now it's an issue that you've spent a lot of your career working on in terms of legislation, different supports and stuff like that. Drugs is almost like the dirty little secret in Ireland, isn't it?
Yeah.
Everyone knows someone who does drugs. They use drugs themselves. No one wants to talk about it. What do you feel from spending so long working in that area is misunderstood about drug use in Ireland, or what sort of conversations should we be having about drugs?
It's hard to not, right? We just need all the middle class people to actually admit their drug use. Really, is what we need to happen.
We need to stick a camera on you and send you in the doll and the challenge.
I was seeing Gordon
It's
Ramsay
just
went
like-
around the restaurants looking for cocaine in these restaurants.
It's the drug conversation has moved on massively, right? 10, 20 years ago, and I'd be talking about the likes of drug decriminalisation and stuff, or the legalisation of marijuana, or any of these types of things, it caused a lot more outrage than it does now, right? So the thinking has moved. The policy is still lagging behind. The biggest problem in Ireland for introducing drug decrim, which is obviously what I have focused on for all these years, everyone is saying it needs to happen. The evidence from it around the world is like prohibition has never, ever, ever worked, ever. So why would we keep having prohibition, right? And the problem is that if you decriminalise possession, what the guards are saying is it will get rid of their powers to stop and search. And what?
Yeah, what does that
Why
mean?
do you want to stop and search if the person is not committing a crime?
Yeah.
And drugs are decriminalised. Obviously, you can still stop and search someone if you suspect them of
A weapon
sale and
or
supply.
whatever, yeah.
Because the substance is still illegal. You're actually only decriminalising the individual for possession, and it would be set at an amount that's considered personal use, depending on whatever the drug is. Would have to have whatever amount set with it. But at the minute, it's the guards. It's the guards getting in the way, kind of scaremongering. It'll take all that power away. It'll do this and do that. And the use of stop and search is already abused. Do you know what I mean? It's already abused. But how prohibition came to Ireland is, right? So back during, obviously, like the Reagan era and Nixon and all of those,
War on
and then
drugs.
you had Harry Anslinger, right? So was it Harry or Henry? Harry Anslinger. And he worked within that administration. And his whole thing was like, in America, like, the white man will, get stoned on marijuana and he'll be fornicating with the black jazz singer, right? And it's like, so actually drug laws were born from racism. Right? It was born from racism and from their class and beyond, right? In America, it was all born from racism. And then Anslinger, he went to the UN then, and he began to fight for that. There would have to be a treaty signed around the world from different places that we would outlaw drugs everywhere. So it actually is an American endeavour. It was an endeavour based on trying to control racial stuff in general. It was all born from there. So it's a racist and classist piece of legislation. You know what I mean? And we just stood over that. So I went back to like the 70s in Ireland when it was debated, and there was people standing up going, "Oh, sure, we wouldn't arrest a man now for having a bit of whiskey on him. Why would we arrest somebody for drug?" It wasn't even an issue. It wasn't even an issue. And there was a special committee set up at the time that said, no, you can't prosecute people for having like possession, or what if he's just someone that needed a bit of help, or already look at. So there was no appetite, but it was a UN treaty and it was driven by America.
Okay.
Right, and that's where our drug laws stem from. Now, obviously, there's more to the story than that. Like, I'm trying to give just the pinpoint the bits. But even then, when the drugs laws in Ireland were being debated, people weren't calling for people to be locked up. Like, that was we're literally working off a racist American agenda.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
It's mad, isn't it? Like, where these things come from. And most people, I'm glad you were there, Lynn, because most people probably just look at it and be like, all right, yeah, cool, that's what we've done, we'll just keep doing that, rather than actually look at it and like, why the fuck do we keep doing this? When you say, just for anyone watching, decriminalisation of drugs,
what's that mean?
What does it mean? Yeah.
So legalisation is obviously a wider subject. So that's you would legalise the substance. Say if you're talking about cannabis specific, right? And you legalise cannabis. There's probably a few different ways, but the two kind of most practiced ways at doing that is like you have in Canada and other places where you have dispensaries and stuff like that, right? So you can, go into the shop, or, and I visited Portland and Oregon and stuff, and you can go in and you can buy it and off you go, right?
Right, yeah.
So, but then the Maltese version and the ones the Germans have introduced is, and Spain, Barcelona and stuff have really kind of invested in the idea of like social clubs. So you have to have a license to grow a certain amount, and you have to be part of a social club. So it's not the dispensary model. So it's less commercial. It's not kind of the for-profit model. So that's legalization, which means that the drug is legal.
Yes.
And potentially then it's administered by the state, and the state would recoup, say, taxes from it and stuff. So in Oregon, they decriminalized drugs, all drugs. So that's what I want, decriminalize all drugs. But it's not actually the drug it's not the drug you're decriminalizing. You're decriminalizing the possession, the person.
Right.
So in Ireland, if you're caught with even the smallest there's only €20 worth of weed in your pocket, you can end up in prison, right? If you get a drug charge in Ireland, it'll stay on your record forever. So the spent convictions legislation, the drugs possession, no matter how small it is, it's in the same category as murder, rape, other violent crimes, firearms.
Jesus.
Right? So it's not even in with minor offences. It's in the category with the one that you cannot get off your record. Right? So that's how bad it is. So can you imagine the amount of people that can't study certain subjects because they were caught with a small amount of drugs? They can't volunteer with their local GAA club because they'll get Garda vetted. They can't get insurance. Right? They can't get certain jobs. They're having to disclose this all the time and just be no. So for me, decriminalising drugs is going, we understand that people use drugs, and people from all walks of life use drugs. The type of drug that's used can differ. So likes of crack and heroin can obviously have most of its concentration in communities that have been underserved and under-resourced. And a lot of that stems from trauma-related stuff, stems from poverty, intergenerational stuff. So for me, you have to decriminalise all drugs, because you don't help all types of people if you only decriminalise the drugs that the middle classes use, right? It has to be all drugs. And what happens is then the substance is still illegal, but you will not end up in the justice system. You'll not be stigmatised, you'll not be shamed. So not everyone who uses drugs will ever need help. Some people use drugs their whole life recreationally, and it's not going to be an issue, right? So you don't need to worry about them when it comes to like health-led approach. They just use drugs, they're not going to need supports. But there is obviously a lot of people who will need supports, who actually end up struggling with addiction and stuff. So they're the people that need to be able to, if they end up in prison and then they enter into recovery somehow, right? How can you fully ever engage in a full recovery in relation to addiction if you have to then tell everyone all your offences or your drugs offences for the rest of your life? The amount of working class people who have gone on to get degrees, masters, PhDs, and they just say it's no use to me. I'm Garda vetted everywhere I go. I'm judged on every offence that I had while I was struggling with addiction, and especially the drug offence just is not taken off my record. And there's people stopped and searched and harassed, stopped and searched, even though they know that them people are only in possession of small amount of drugs. But often it's used as a tool as well to badger people for more information about other people. So people have said they've been brought in for questioning on very small amounts of drugs, but really it was with the intention of them giving up other people. So putting people's lives in danger, vulnerable people's lives in danger. And that's where the stop and search, you don't want to give up, you know what I mean? So decriminalisation, to be specific, is you wouldn't buy it in shops. You can't. So that's the problem. There's still an illegal market operating.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So that's the difference. But it means that the most vulnerable people, who are the ones that have possession of it in their pocket, but they're not drug dealers. So under decriminalisation, it's still illegal to sell and supply. So there will still be an effort to there will still be efforts to when there's criminality, when there's drug dealing, because that's still illegal. But it just means that the person who is on the lower end of that, who's the person in possession of substance, isn't.
That makes a lot of sense. You mentioned that this has been tried and tested in other places quite well. What's been some of the findings, let's say, that they've...
So Portugal has had good findings. That's 20 years in, and I've visited lots of places. So I've visited Portugal, I visited Oregon, and just the sky hasn't fallen in. So it's not that less people will use drugs, but you'll have less people in prison, so you improve the health, you improve people's health. Like, prison is bad for your health. You think drugs is bad for your health? Prison is bad for your health, right? Prison is bad for your health. And there's less spread of blood-borne viruses, because when people are in prison, if they do have a heroin addiction, they'll often if they get their hand on a needle, they'll be sharing that needle. So you reduce the amount of people in prison, you reduce the amount of people engaged in risky practice when it comes to their drug use. And then there's also stuff around just, improvements in people's mental health, because they're not obviously being affected by the justice system, having to go to court, not being able to get jobs if they do look for employment. So overall, it has a better impact on the individual. Like, in those countries as well, what you would have is consumption rooms in some of them as well, which helps save lives and keep people safe. So like, there's several consumption rooms around the world, and the thing is, nobody has ever died in a consumption room of an overdose. So it's a health intervention, in a sense, a safe health intervention. And it's important. Like, people are scared. I understand people are scared. Oh, but if you allow all of this, are you just encouraging drug use? And the thing is, drug use is happening, and it's always happened. Even under the strictest of laws, it has happened in every single society and culture. People have saw pleasure or sedation through substance. I think potentially the Inuits were potentially the last people to be identified as allowing substance into the space.
Oh, right.
But like that, like, literally every community has. And some substances, when used in a particular way, have health benefits. So whether it's psilocybin, whether it's ketamine treatment, whether it's MDMA treatment, they're being trialled constantly in America. There's a trial happened in Ireland. I'm on a research thing with the HRB. I'm one of the supervisors. I can't remember what frame they put on it for another psilocybin research, in terms of using psilocybin in a way that actually allows a therapeutic intervention in relation to trauma and stuff. So sometimes drugs are also medicines. What usually results in drugs being really chaotic and harmful is usually people's lives and conditions that they've lived in, that emotional regulation. Like, drugs, some people say that drugs saved their lives, even though they ended up in severe addiction. Now, it obviously ended up massively affecting their lives, but in the time, they may have been abuse survivors and they never spoke about it. They may have had family stuff, institutional stuff, and the option to them was to numb that or die.
How to get through it.
And they chose to numb it, to regulate it through drugs. So often addiction is a response to trauma. So to imagine, to call somebody that's response to trauma ends up being addiction. Oh, you're a criminal. We're going to put you in front of a judge and you're going to go to prison for medicating your trauma in the way that you did. So so
it's a great point. I know you mentioned Gabor Mate on a couple of podcasts you were on. He has a quote. I think it's like, when someone's addicted, don't ask why the addiction, ask why the pain. Like, that's what you were saying there. Like, it's generally not rooted in a place of, I want to be an addict. It's something like
nobody. And even if it looks like someone's resisting a treatment and their behaviours like, people that fucking, like, when I used drugs, I was also a fucking wanker on them. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it's like, so it's kind of like, it's not that, like, it's difficult to deal with people that have behavioural stuff, emotional stuff. That's not like that. That's all true, right? It's difficult and it's hard, but we have to still go, why? Why is that happening? And I know it's hard. And families, like, when you have someone in the household with an addiction, the whole family, whole family is in that addiction, and the person becomes the centre of that attention. Where are they? What are they doing? Are they all right? Will you open that bedroom door and make sure that they're awake? Are they alive? Did you see them today? Like, everyone becomes consumed by the person in addiction, and that's really hard on families. But we have to keep asking, why is that pain there? And we can talk about it from an individual sense or back to the societal piece. Why are so many women now, women who are mothers, women who are often, their children are grown up, there's so many women whose children are grown up who are now on crack?
Is there?
Yeah, so it's like, why is that? There's a pattern here. Is there isolation? Is there loneliness? What happened throughout the last 10, 20 years to them in terms of their community or their sense of belonging or their sense of place? So there's just so many different things that we need to look at in relation to why someone may end up in addiction. And that's notwithstanding that it's difficult to deal with. Do you know what I mean? So it's not that you go around and just go, oh, it's all right if you're like in bits on drugs and just you can stay in the house here and still run amok. It's grand. We know you're in pain. Because at the end of the day, people still need to protect their own sanity and their own. But it's about having the right help, the right interventions. But it's still difficult. Do you know, addiction is difficult. Yeah,
That's great points there.
How far did the legislation get in terms of nearly being brought in? Or
so my legislation was paused so that they could do the public consultation on drug decriminalisation.
Right.
So that happened, and there was 22,000 submissions, the largest ever amount of submissions to a consultation in Ireland ever. And it was overwhelmingly supporting decrim. So then they set up a working group, and in that working group there was lots of vested interests.
Okay.
So you had the guards, you had, you know, the department, you had two people with experience of using the services and who've used drugs. You had but lots of vested interests.
Yes.
And Judge Garrett Sheehan was the chair of that. And I was hopeful. I was like, okay, a judge, he has to experience the amount of people, the recidivism rates, the amount of people ending up in front of him because of drug use. Surely he'll understand that that's a revolving door and it's not helpful. And he actually ended up like saying there should be harsher penalties. So it was really disappointing. So there was kind of recommendations then that came from that were kind of like adult caution schemes, but that's still justice system. You can't remove stigma and shame if you keep the justice system involved in drug use or addiction related issues. You just can't. You have to remove the justice system completely. And the version that they've tried to put forward was that. So from that then, going into the next government, we were all unhappy with the outcome of that. It's not what the citizens said in the consultation. Do you know what I mean? And then the Green Party, I know Oisin Smith and Nessa Horrigan especially fought for the Citizens' Assembly to be in the programme for government. And that's what happened last year. The Citizens' Assembly happened with 99 citizens who came together and were absolutely amazing in what they worked on in relation to drug policy in Ireland. Not only, obviously, decrim is the main policy legal bit, but then you have all the other stuff. You have the detox beds, the recovery capital, the access to services, you know, funding in general, looking at socio-economic reasons and the relationship between poverty and addiction and all these things. So they looked at loads. But the main policy change was very clear from them. They were like decriminalisation and destigmatisation of the drug user. So where that's at now is they reported their recommendations, and now they've introduced the memo went to Cabinet this week that will now establish a special committee in the Oireachtas of senators to come up with. So we've already answered, we already have the evidence, we know what needs to happen. Now they need to go, how does it happen? How do we do it?
Okay, strategy for
so so that committee will start meeting in April, which I hope to be on, but there's only so many places on it, so you kind of have to negotiate with other parties and stuff. So I obviously will be working hard to get on that committee. But you know, the evidence is clear, like, you know, in terms of what needs to happen. The guards in Ireland are an issue in relation to it, but they just need to
shut up.
Oh man, you must feel like hitting your head against the wall sometimes. With
Jesus. Does this is probably a hard question to answer, but firstly, are you optimistic that it is going to come true, and do you have like an idea in mind how long?
I progressively can see that people are changing their thinking, so that gives me hope. That does make me optimistic. I think we will potentially have a general election at some stage this year. I'm worried it will get in the way of whatever the committee recommends. I don't know what the next government will look like if it's spilled over into that. So time is against us at the moment. And we definitely need to enter that space of creating legislation on decriminalisation while also addressing the issue of the stop and search and making sure that we remove that. I think that will continue to be a bone of contention there. So hopefully the committee is made up of people who are willing to address that. And we need to remove retrospective. So if they introduce decrim, we need to make sure that anyone that has ever been caught in possession and has a possession charge, that it's wiped off their record, so that you can actually improve the lives of everyone that has had to endure this policy for a long time.
I like it. Have no doubt there's someone who's fully against it just because they're not arse going back
yeah,
and having to go through all the records and
Some admin in the Garda HQ.
Well, see, Ireland's Garda Venton is literally 2 men or 1 man in Longford, I think it is. Guard.
No wonder it takes so long.
It's not digitised.
Is it not? No. Oh
No.
my god. Oh yeah, he's
It doesn't
definitely
shock
against
me,
this
but-
one.
Yeah, it's manual, it's human. It's a human.
Another area I wanted to speak to you about, I think you can't speak about drug use, criminalisation without speaking about prisons in Ireland,
Yeah.
because they're just so intricately connected.
Yeah.
And I know you've done your conversations in the margins, which was speaking with prisoners, not giving away any identities or anything like that, but just their stories, their background, what brought them to where they're at. Doing that whole series of podcasts, did you learn anything new about the prison system in Ireland, or try anything about the prison system in Ireland that isn't common knowledge that you feel should be?
I think I didn't learn that and I didn't know. I think what brings me to work in the prison is everything I do know, you know, and that's what brings me there. I think for me, I hate the idea of people's freedom, like people not having a freedom, right? But also there has to be accountability, especially if it's a crime where there's a victim, you know, or a victim's family. But for me with prison, the punishment is you're sent to prison.
Yeah.
Your punishment shouldn't continue while you're in prison in terms of how you're treated. That should be where you're allowed to develop or to think or to engage in life. The whole goal of society should be, how do we reduce victims? How do you reduce victims? And you don't reduce the amount of victims by ostracising people who've committed crime. If you ostracize people enough, you push them to stay in particular crime or on the fringes of society where they're going to be most accepted or less judged. When you create conditions where people can develop and not do any more harm, that should be the ideal outcome for anyone. That becomes difficult when we know what people potentially have done, especially if, say, someone has taken someone else's life and stuff. That's very hard because families are left behind and you also want to then advocate for the person who's done that. But what you're advocating for is the same as what you would hope victims' organisations are advocating for, and that is the end of harm. And to get to the end of harm, we have to be able to give people chances to re-engage in society in a way that is supportive and allows them to move away from a life of any more criminal acts. And that's the kind of goal for me. But it's also known how many people have ended up in the prison system because of the conditions in which they came from. And one man who I worked with recently in Mountjoy Prison on the theatre of the oppressed, he's very clear when he says to me, like, and I just think it's just worth thinking about, is no perpetrator of violence or crime wasn't a victim before they were a perpetrator. So they're not different groups. Lots of people in prison are also victims. They've also endured lots of things, whether it be violence in the home, in the community, whatever institutional stuff. You know, they've had parents who have had awful experiences of institutional homes and bias schools and all of this, right? So you don't have one group over here that are a victim and another group over here that are perpetrators. They're intertwined in many ways. So for me, what I think, it's not that I think people don't know about prison and they should. It's what more I would like to kind of increase understanding of is that if we are to have a safer society, we need to work with people that we potentially are told we should be afraid of, or we should be this or we should be that. Do you know what I mean? Because if you don't work with people and create loving, safe conditions for everyone, well then you're actually you're not helping. It doesn't help. Do you know what I mean? And I think it's a difficult subject to talk about because people have been hurt by people. Do you know what I mean? And that's hard. So conversations on the margins for me was about getting some of their voices out there in a way that I don't give their identity away, and I also don't give their crime away. People are voyeuristic for crime. It's like fucking crime porn or something, like, do you know what I mean? It's kind of like everyone wants what they do, like it's a TV show,
the drama,
right?
yeah.
There's an obsession. So for me, doing conversations on the margins was, it's not about the crime and it's not about the individual's identity, but it's about hearing people talk about their lives. And if we only hear that piece of information, do we empathise? And what stops us empathising? And it's usually all the other external things that have happened that stop us empathising on that raw human level. And I think if we can just empathise on that raw human level, we can help. Like, people are accountable. People that have done things in prison are being held accountable. They are taken, the people I work with take accountability for what they've done. Do you know what I mean? But we have to be able to go, well, what next? Ireland's system, like, people will be back in society. Do you know what I mean? So you have to, and especially when we look at violence, like, the state always talks about violence in a way where, increase the sentences, do this, do that. And it's like, can we all have a discussion about the core drivers of violence? Nobody wants to discuss why violence exists, how it exists, where it manifests. And that's a problem for me because, like, the guillotine never stopped murder.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, people were literally had their head chopped off in the square, in the public, and then it didn't stop people murdering people. So locking people up or, using people in this way that you're displaying them as immoral, so therefore yous won't do this because we've locked that person up. That's not true. We've had prison systems. We've had, in America, they've literally still have, like, the death penalties in some counties, and they've the highest murder rate. So what's going on there? Do you know what I mean? So it doesn't, just because you make it more punitive, doesn't actually reduce violence. And I think I want a society that is free from violence. So just because I'm willing to work with people who've committed violent crimes doesn't mean that I'm okay with violence. It means I want to reduce violence. I just go about it in a different way. So for me, it's about, how do we reduce violence? What are the core drivers? There's an amazing book, and actually there's clips of him online if people want to watch him. His name is James Gilligan. He is a criminologist in American prisons, and he also worked for the World Health Organization, and he kind of talks about the core drivers of violence, and he talks about shame being one of the biggest drivers of violence, and an inability to be able to meet one's economic needs. And he's done rakes of research and studies, and he's brilliant, and he really breaks down why people engage in violence. And then there's obviously other reasons as well: emotional regulation, impulse stuff, family stuff, there's societal stuff, but he's brilliant on the core drivers of violence. So for me, when I work with men in the prison, when I work with the justice system, it's really because I want to reduce violence, and and they experience violence too, like what he said to me. It's like, I was a victim long before I was a perpetrator. And I think we need to be listening to them voices, because people who are often closest to the problem are closest to the solution. So if someone who is engaged in violent acts, they're closest to the problem. And if you really, really work with people well enough, they'll be able to identify and get to the reasons as to why they may have engaged in violence. And we need to have a greater understanding of that. And we need that to then be able to inform our policy. Like, it's about €90,000 a year to keep a prisoner in prison. €90,000 a year. Like, and we have lots of people in on short sentences that shouldn't be in prison on short sentences. Imagine, look at the level of poverty and the low levels of education of most people that end up in the prison system. Imagine they had 90,000 a year invested in them when they were 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. Imagine taking them 90,000s and flipping them to earlier in life, and the outcomes that you would have had. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of, it just doesn't make sense to me. It's on the wrong end of, on the wrong end of things,
Yeah, so powerful, Lynn. That's amazing. And what you were saying about at the very beginning around the class system, and like how there's people in the upper echelons, let's say, who look at people in lower class and be like, oh, they're different, like we're better or whatever else. There can sometimes be that from anyone in any class, and prisoners, it's like, oh, they're just different, because they commit. So it's like the same patterns that come through at even the different levels and different.
Yeah, but there's very little people. Like, I mean, there's very little reason for politicians to kind of represent people who are in prison. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, you can vote when you're in prison. Actually, I'd much, like I'd actually, I always have this idea in my head where I'm going to go in and bring in everything that's needed to register, the whole of Mountjoy, and then say, now do you care? There's like a few hundred prisoners down here.
Yeah, they might be knocking on prison cells.
You know, but
on the cells,
but the prison system is a difficult thing because there's a lot of people that should no longer be there. The prison system is not going to provide them anything else.
Yeah.
There's people who have gained their degrees there. I have one man who works for me directly from the prison, from Loughlin House, and he's on a life sentence. He's one of the smartest, most amazing policy heads. He's brilliant, and the prison system there's nothing else the prison system can do to improve his life. You know, he's done it all. There's literally people in there who are like Buddha level meditation, non-reactive. You know, there's nothing more the prison system can do for them. But they will stay in there sometimes for optics because media, so-and-so is out, da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
Killer this, killer that. And it's like, actually, you're talking about an 18-year-old, and that's not who exists anymore. And how do we talk about the person who exists now? You know, so there's a lot of people in prison that don't need to be there anymore. Some of them are there 20 years, and they're just waiting. They're just waiting to be released. They've done all the development they could possibly do, and they're probably a lot more well than most of us that are not in there. You know what I mean? Yeah.
That's a great point. And it's such a shame because you speak with the one thing that just seems completely amiss in politics across the world, and that's common sense. And it's like when you break down these issues and look, we've done X for so long, we've got result Y, we're not happy with this result. A lot of people say, let's just keep doing X. When the simple solution, let's try something different.
But maybe they want to warehouses then. Do you know what I mean? Maybe they want to filter us all into, like, you know, we look back and like you were saying, like we look back at 100 years and go, oh God, remember they did that? Or we look back at Magdalene Laundry's 40 years ago, remember they did that? Well, sorry, we have like how many women and their babies in hotels? It's just another form of institution, really. It's institutionalisation. You know, it's institutionalisation because it's not your own home. You've no agency, you've no autonomy. Your child can't have a sleepover. You know, you grew up in a state like mine. You met your friends, you walked to school with them, you walked home for your lunch and had your bleeding meanie roll or something. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of, so like all those things, do you know what I mean, of being part of a community? That's what institutions take away. So we still have that, right? And we have the prison system, we have the Garda vetting system, which will make sure that if you have any sort of minor charge, you just won't be given the job. They're all serving some form, and that's to keep us away, in a sense. Do you know what I mean? Yeah,
that's a great point. I'm conscious of the time. I have two more questions. I don't know about yourself.
A couple of quick fires, but crack on.
Yeah. At any given moment, you may step away from politics and move into something else. When it's all said and done and you're no longer in the political sphere, what would you like to be remembered for? Or how would you like to be remembered?
You would hope that some of the stuff I've worked on became law, right? But I'm not there yet. Like obviously I've passed spent convictions through the Shannon. It's still waiting to go through the Dáil, which would allow people to have a greater amount of minor convictions and stuff taken off their record so that they can get on with their lives, and to decriminalise drugs possession. They're two policy things. Obviously poverty is such a big thing for me. Like poverty looks different than it did in the 40s. Like we don't have holes in our runners. People go around in Air Max and a Canada Goose jacket but are living in poverty, right? Because poverty is not only financial, it's cultural, it's about chances, it's about choices, it's about the arts, it's about, do you get to go to a theatre? Like just because you wear a Montclair jacket doesn't mean that you've broken through some ceiling now and you're like, you know, living life. You're not, like, you know, so poverty looks different. And I think for me, I would like to be known for someone that was able to bring a lot of those realities to the fore and into people's consciousness and minds. But I think the biggest thing I want to be known for is actually my community just like still liking me. Because like, you know, there's going to be things because I'm so public and they kind of go, what is she fucking on about? Like, you know, I don't agree with that. Like, or, you know, they might know me my whole life and they have their own lived experiences and their own issues or their own lives and their own thoughts and opinions. For me, the biggest thing was to be able to be in politics and also still be fully accepted as Lynn from Killinarden, and not for people not to feel like I wasn't one of them anymore.
Yep.
So that's important for me. Is I need my identity as like a Tallaght woman who's a little bit mad and refuses to wear anything other than Nikes in the chamber. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, you know. So for me, it's about me feeling like I didn't only represent people, but that they could still relate to me, and that I was still me. I didn't have to be someone else to succeed at something.
Deadly. You're gone the right way about it. Second question, and this is a very unfair one, but I just have to ask.
Go on.
If you could click your fingers and wake up tomorrow and change something about Ireland, what would it be?
Ooh. The weather.
It would be the eradication of poverty and class systems. Yeah.
Nice. Two simple ones for me, nothing too in-depth, Lynn. First one, you're very well read, I can tell, like the amount of thinking that you do on things, level of depth. I know you said philosophy is what you study now. Is there any books that you recommend people if they want to expand their horizons or get stuck into?
Yeah, it depends really what you're interested in. Like, you know, so some of the books I'm really interested in the whole area, and I don't want to open up a new subject because we go, but in the bias and algorithms and like, you know, facial recognition technology, it's you know, all of that stuff that's going to be brought in as like high level surveillance and mostly misused and targeted against particular groups. And so there's an amazing book that I read last year called Automated Inequality. And it's about how you know, AI and algorithms I suppose is literally has further compounded you know, inequality. So that's a good book. There's a good book called The Melancholy of Class, which is really good, and that goes even into music and stuff, and you know, how class. There's a brilliant book by John Bissett called It's Not Where You Live, which is really, it is true. That's not true. It is where you live, because that's how the class system works, right? But it's that phrase, you know, people in working class communities will use that phrase, you know. But that's kind of an anthropological piece of writing about a flat complex in Dublin, and it goes into like everything from, you know, how women have kept, you know, the place going, do you know what I mean? And it's obviously about the labour market, and it's about, you know, but it's class again. We spoke a lot about drug decriminalisation. I think a good book to understand the history of it would be Johann Hari's Chasing the Scream.
Okay.
And that will give that full history. I only touched on it in terms of how we ended up with our laws, but that book is brilliant. There's also a good book called, what am I reading at the minute? I'm reading Angela Davis's book, a biography at the minute. I read about 4 books a month.
Okay, nice.
Last year I read all of Maya Angelou's books, 7 of them. They're really, really good reads. And I read a lot of heavy philosophy, so I don't know. I don't know if I'll overly recommend them ones, but
there's plenty.
There's loads there. Yeah,
plenty there for people to get stuck into. And last but not least, obviously, at the moment you're Senator Lynn Ruane, but if you could do any other job in the world aside from being a senator, what would it be?
Do you know what I did? Do you know what actually I do? I wish somebody would just keep giving me loads of money. Like philanthropists would just keep giving me loads of money to set up. I should be just paid for a person that has a million ideas. And then I should be given enough money to get the right people with the right skills to make those ideas happen. Okay. So I'm absolutely amazing at coming up with different social enterprises. I'm amazing at coming up with different responses on community levels to different things. You know, whether it's alternatives to violence programs, whether it's, you know, I'm great at I'm great at big ideas. I'm ADHD, which I only learned last year. Okay. So now I used to get annoyed with myself that I was great at coming up ideas, making them kind of start, and then going, well, somebody else just take this over now. Like, so now I know that it's actually because I get really into something, and then I need to pass it on to someone else. I need someone else to I need to get it going and let somebody else run it then. So I would just love a load of philanthropic funding to just set up a load of amazing initiatives, amazing programs. I'd love loads of social enterprises with men and women leaving the prison system. In Australia, there's a, I think it's in Sydney, I could be wrong, but in one of the Australian states, it has literally written into their procurement legislation. So procurement is when you have to go out and procure a service from society, like, you know, so like the Children's Hospital went through a procurement process, if you can imagine that. it's how the state buys what it needs, you know, from whether it's contractors or, you know, construction firms or whatever it may be. So in this Australian piece of legislation says that so much of them tenders have to go to particular social enterprises that work with, say, minority groups or marginalised groups.
Right.
So I'd love like to target things in that way, but then be able to have enough money from philanthropic funders to help people set up their own ideas and big artist collectives and all of that kind of stuff. So basically, I don't want to be anything. I just want somebody
be
to
something different every day.
just give me money and
well, if there's any millionaire, billionaire philanthropists watching, feel free to sponsor Lynn. We can back our own vouch for it.
Throw the Molloy twins a few quid. Sorry, no.
But no, Lynn, honestly, thanks a million for coming in today. That was really insightful. I got loads from it. I've definitely got loads from it, and I'm sure anyone listening did as well. Anyone who wants to keep up with what you're doing, what your work is, or what you have coming up in the next few months, where can they find you?
So I'm on Instagram. I came off Twitter last April because I'd much rather go out into the field and have a scrap with you than have to be on that fucking bleeding website. I hate it. So it's like, so my Twitter is gone. I said, but I had something like I had like 50,000 followers, and like me staff are kind of going, but we put a lot of our work out there, you know. And I was like, I can't. My relationship with Twitter cannot in any way determine whether I'm re-elected or not. Like, do you know what I mean? Because sometimes like people would come at me and I'd be just like,
not today.
Just like, but like it's like, I can't be diplomatic. Like I just want to go.
I know.
I just want to respond in a way.
I heard you use the phrase before, like, I'm gonna go Tallaght on them.
I will go Tallaght on them. Yeah. So I'm mostly on Instagram now, and I have got a website, but it's currently being revamped. I haven't been kind of updating it much. But yes, on my Instagram, I try and put a lot of my work stuff out there. Yeah.
Amazing. Excellent. At Senator Lynn Ruane, is it? Or?
I think it's Senator _Lynn_.
Right, well, you'll find that. Type in Lynn Ruane. There's not many Lynn Ruanes running about, so
no.
we'll find that. Well, thanks so much for coming in today.
Thank you, Lynn. Appreciate it.
Thank you.